Good afternoon. We're here in the Next Media Studios in Hong Kong to speak about media, what's going on. I'm joined here by Paul Woodward, who runs Business Strategies Group, which claims to be the only consultants covering the B2B industry in Asia exclusively.
We are really, I think, the only people covering B2B, media, information, events industry. Yeah. It's a kind of specialized world, and we cover all of Asia, but it's just us at the moment.
Okay, and what are some of the trends right now? What's going on? What's new? What's different? What's unique about what's happening here in Asia?
Well, I'm really watching at the moment with great interest to see the impact of the big changes which are starting to affect manufacturing industries in China, and the on the B2B media that are supporting them. We're looking at companies like Alibaba, Global Sources, and lots of the other companies there, the big trade fair businesses, and a lot of what they do has been grouped around the huge expansion of export-focused manufacturing in South China. We're hearing a lot from the manufacturers at the moment that the costs in China, especially in South China, Pearl River Delta, are beginning to get too expensive. People are talking about will the manufacturing start going to Vietnam, or more of it going to Vietnam, Philippines, Indonesia, other places. There was a piece in one of the big newspapers just today about potentially huge job losses in Dongguan as shoe manufacturers.
Okay, so this is a macro trend. The macro trend is that these companies are leaving China because they're finding cheaper places to manufacture. And the question is, what is the B2B media going to do around that, I guess?
Right. I mean, will the big trade fairs that currently take place in Hong Kong and in Guangzhou and other places, I mean, if the manufacturing goes elsewhere, what will be the effect of that? I think the big companies like Global Sources and Alibaba that are they're serving the whole of China, they've actually got experience in other places in Asia, will probably be okay. That we may see something of a shakeout amongst the companies that are more sort of Hong Kong, Guangdong, South China based, and that's really where their expertise is. They may have more trouble following business to Vietnam, even to the inner provinces in China. I mean, there's a good example of that would be that sort of 10, 15 years ago, a number of the big companies in that sort of business were in Taiwan. Quite a few of them were associated with the big newspaper groups in Taiwan, and they weren't really able to follow effectively the businesses when they moved into South China.
Okay, so if we look for another trend, could we look in terms of the second-tier cities even beyond moving to, you're talking about companies moving out of China and to manufacture in Vietnam or other countries. What about as firms move inland too? Are the B2B companies going to be able to follow there?
Some will be able to, and companies like Global Sources and Alibaba, for example, who have offices all over China already, will be quite well positioned to service their clients there. The other significance of the second-tier cities, and that's a good point to raise, is that as international companies begin to look more and more at the consumer markets within China and, to some extent, India, they're going to be looking beyond the obvious places, beyond Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, or in India's case, Mumbai and New Delhi. I was just at a conference last week in Macau with the leading IT publisher out of India, who was talking about how his company, both in terms of online, its magazines and its events, is working out how to service the sort of the 20 next tier cities. You've got sort of what they call the A-level cities, and then there are about 25 cities which they're calling the B and C level cities. Relatively hard, even in terms of distributing traditional print publications, relatively hard to get in even to that level of cities. So the bigger local companies are learning how to work in those markets, as interestingly, increasingly are the big international companies. So companies like Reed, CMP, Nielsen, these big companies that are already quite well established in the key markets in China and in India now, are looking at saying, okay, we know how to service the big markets. Now how can we go and make money in the next level?
Okay, but these next level companies are only going to be in countries like China and India, or China and India specifically only. Is that
yes, exactly right. I mean, the market for within country regional business is pretty tiny. Most other places in Asia, where if you look at most markets, if you look at Korea, really all business is focused around Seoul. In Thailand, most of it's around Bangkok, etc., etc. So yes.
What about the issue of a lot of these B2B companies are facing difficulties in their home markets? Is that going to have any impact on what's going on in business information? Is they're trying to sell off the publishing business, as I understand it? Is that going to have any impact out here in Asia?
It could do, and it could do in one of a couple of ways. You're right. I mean, as the economy slows down in the US and to some extent Europe, those markets are getting tougher at home.
And quite possibly out here in Asia.
Possibly. But I think as those companies look around, they're going to see less pressure on their businesses here, less pressure on marketing and advertising spending in Asia, because we're still seeing domestic markets coming up and growing. So possibly they'll focus more of their attention here. But frankly, if they're struggling at home, particularly those big companies that were bought out by private equity firms a while ago, who are now under huge financial pressure in their home markets. Now, whether that opens the door for some of the bigger Asian companies to expand elsewhere in the region, we'll have to see. But it's going to be quite interesting to see how that plays out.
Okay, so it could be opening up. What we could see is an opening for the Asian players when the large Western players are facing their difficulties right now.
Yeah, although I would have to say there are very few of those big Asian players. I mean, we have less than a handful of companies here with sales of more than $100 million.
We're talking Alibaba and Global Sources, basically.
Yeah, and a few others. I mean, if you look in Japan, you have Nikkei, which has traditionally been primarily a business focused around Japan, but it does actually have some other international activities. It has a presence in China. There's no reason that a company like Nikkei couldn't be. So there are a few, but it's a relatively small number that are big. I mean, there are only around 20 B2B media companies in Asia that are actually listed on stock markets, for example. Most of them are relatively small, privately held companies, or, and this is an important trend in Asia, they're government controlled. In the sense that a lot of the trade promotion activity is controlled by organizations like the Trade Development Council in Hong Kong, KOTRA in Korea. A lot of rumblings still amongst the private sector as to if and when any governments around the region will ever look at privatizing some of those portfolios, particularly of trade fairs and maybe even their web businesses.
Which could open things up. Okay.
I mean, actually, say, for example, Hong Kong Trade Development Council is one of the biggest players in B2B media in Asia.
Okay. Let's move on to a different concept of B2B media. How has the internet changed things in terms of entering markets in Asia? Asia has relatively small markets. Some of them are quite closed. What are the tactics that people are using the internet differently from the past?
Yeah. I think we are increasingly seeing publishers realizing that they can use the internet, electronic media, to launch themselves into the more difficult markets in Asia. They can test the markets, they can build their brands, they can begin to develop content.
And here we're seeing an example you were highlighting a moment ago, which is the Plastics News website. What
Exactly.
What is interesting about this?
Okay, it's an absolutely classic type of B2B trade publishing business. It's based in Plastics News is a big, strong brand in the US for a mid-sized company called Crane. They looked at all sorts of options, ways in which they could develop their business in China. They didn't particularly like the regulatory environment there. It's very, very unfriendly to publishers still. They thought there's no reason why not to launch into this market with an e-newsletter backed by a Chinese language website, sell advertising to start with to their core clients at home, gradually begin to build up the business in China. Maybe one day a publication like that would appear as a print publication, but
not
possibly
necessarily.
not. We've never seen print B2B trade media reach real critical mass in China outside the IT sector. In the IT sector, maybe. Computer World China has traditionally been a huge magazine, although smaller now. But in most sectors, it's never reached critical mass, and arguably, China may be a market in which it never goes to print. It may be online only.
So this is a different model. So looking more broadly, I guess what you're saying is we're going to have tough times ahead for a lot of companies, interesting changes happening, and online pushing things ahead.
Absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much, Paul.
Thank you.